Let's jump right into this explainer, where we're going to entirely reframe something we all absolutely love: cooking a steak. Now, look, I think we've all experienced that sheer heart-dropping panic, right? You buy this expensive, gorgeous cut of beef, throw it into a hot pan, and just kind of cross your fingers and desperately hope for the best. For way too long, getting that mouth-watering, perfect steak at home has been treated like some elusive chef's intuition, like it's a magical instinct you either have or you don't. And when it goes sideways, well, you end up chewing on a $30 gray tire. Not fun. But today we're looking at this through a totally different lens. What if we just ditch the guesswork and treat cooking a ribeye not as a mysterious art form, but as a totally accessible, completely controllable science experiment?
So why exactly does a perfectly cooked steak require a degree in physics? Like, what actually separates a spectacular culinary masterpiece from a sad, chewy disaster? We've all been there. You get a beautiful piece of meat, you psych yourself up, you sear it, and somehow it just comes out tough. It is incredibly frustrating. But here's the really good news. The difference between success and failure, it doesn't rely on luck. You don't need a commercial-grade kitchen, and you definitely don't need $500 pans. It literally just comes down to a basic understanding of thermal energy. Once you grasp the unbreakable rules of heat transfer, you can completely, predictably control what ends up on your plate. Every single time.
Okay, let's move right into our first section: the objective, or the culinary gold standard. Right, so before we can cook the perfect steak, we have to define what perfect actually means on a molecular level. Medium rare is not just a feeling, and it's definitely not that old trick where you poke the meat and compare it to the squishiness of your palm. Forget that. Medium rare is a strict, undeniable thermodynamic threshold that rests exactly between 130 and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. That specific temperature band, or about 54 to 57 degrees Celsius for our metric friends, is the absolute target. It's the destination. If you miss this incredibly narrow window, the actual physical structure of the steak changes. We're not just talking about it being a little less pink, we're talking about a fundamental structural alteration of the meat. You are either inside the threshold or you're outside of it. Thermodynamics really doesn't care about a middle ground. And understanding this specific temperature window absolutely matters because of what's happening inside the meat at that exact moment. When you hit that 130 to 135 degree mark, you begin to melt and render the intramuscular fat. You know, that beautiful white marbling you see when it's raw? It also breaks down the highly prized spinalis dorsi, which you might know as the incredibly flavorful ribeye cap. By hitting this precise thermal threshold, that dense fat transforms into a rich liquid, literally basting the muscle fibers from the inside out. That is what gives you that incredibly rich, buttery texture, while keeping that deep red, juicy center we all crave. But it's a super delicate balance. If you push past 140 degrees, those muscle fibers violently contract. They basically tense up like a wrung-out sponge, squeezing all of that brilliant moisture right out of the steak and onto your cutting board, leaving you with dry, tough meat.
So that brings us to section 2, the physics, and specifically the 1.5-inch buffer. To actually achieve that perfect interior, our very first rule boils down to a simple, non-negotiable number: 1.5. A perfectly cooked ribeye requires a minimum thickness of 1.5 inches. Now, you might be wondering, why is this specific measurement so absolutely critical? Well, it's because this dimension acts as a thermodynamic buffer. Think of it as a literal physical shield against rapid heat transfer. When you blast the outside of the meat with blistering heat to get that nice crust, that 1.5 inches of mass forces the thermal energy to travel slowly towards the center. It buys you the critical time you need to develop a heavy, dark, delicious crust without instantly turning the inside into shoe leather. Just think about those standard grocery store steaks you see wrapped in plastic. Supermarkets love to slice them thin, usually under an inch, because it keeps the price per package down. It looks like a better deal, right? Basic retail economics. But structurally speaking, it is setting the home cook up for absolute failure. If your cut is too thin, it just doesn't possess enough mass. It completely lacks the physical structure to protect its core during a high-heat sear. By the time the outside looks brown and appetizing, the thermal energy has already rushed straight to the center. Boom, the inside is well done, gray, and completely ruined. Plus, thin cuts can't retain enough heat for a proper resting phase, which actually brings us to an absolutely vital step.
Honestly, ignoring the laws of carryover cooking is the single biggest point of failure for home cooks. You absolutely cannot leave the steak on the heat until the center hits your target of 130 degrees. If you do that, way too late. The battle is already lost. You have to pull the steak early at exactly 120 to 125 degrees. Why? Because of the trapped residual thermal energy in the exterior layers. Even after you take that steak out of a blazing hot pan, the heat doesn't just disappear. It keeps traveling inward, seeking equilibrium while the meat rests. A proper 1.5-inch steak is naturally going to see a core temperature rise of about 5 to 10 degrees just sitting on your cutting board. Ever cut into a steak right off the stove, only to watch a tragic puddle of juices flood your plate? Yeah, that happens because the math wasn't respected. You've got to step back, pull it early, and let the laws of physics finish the job for you.
All right, let's shift gears to section 3, the chemistry and the legendary Maillard reaction.
Now that we've got the inside of the steak and the physics of heat transfer locked down, we really need to look at the outside. Because, let's face it, a perfect interior means nothing without a brilliant, savory crust. And to get that, we need a magic number, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. This is the exact temperature where the Maillard reaction kicks into high gear. The Maillard reaction is this complex chemical cascade between amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, and reducing sugars. When they hit this specific heat, they break down and recombine into literally hundreds of new flavor compounds. It's the exact same chemical process that creates the brown crust on baked bread or even toasted marshmallows. But here's the catch. It accelerates aggressively only when the surface temperature of your meat hits exactly 350 degrees. And to be clear, I'm talking about the actual surface temperature of the steak itself, not just the pan.
And there is one really common critical error that prevents this beautiful chemical reaction from ever taking place. To get the surface of the meat to 350 degrees, the exterior must be bone dry. If there is any surface moisture present, like water, condensation, or juices pooling on the meat, the thermal energy from your pan is wasted entirely on evaporation. Think about it. Water physically cannot exceed 212 degrees Fahrenheit before turning to steam. So as long as there is moisture on the surface, your steak's temperature is hard capped at 212 degrees. Until every single drop of water boils off, your meat is effectively steaming in the pan, rather than searing. You're basically boiling a beautiful ribeye, which is a tragedy. Always pat your steaks completely, obsessively dry with a paper towel before they hit the heat, or you'll just never get the chemistry needed for that crust. Moving on to section 4, the counter-narrative. Let's talk about some hacks and health warnings. Playing devil's advocate for a second here, the strict rules of that 1.5-inch buffer and all the mental gymnastics of carryover math, they can actually be bypassed entirely. By using a low ambient heat environment, like a sous vide immersion circulator, or even just a super low 250-degree oven, you can slowly, methodically bring the entire steak up to exactly 130 degrees from edge to edge before you ever even attempt to sear it. You probably know this as the reverse sear. It effectively eliminates the temperature gradient. Because the heat is applied so gently over such a long period of time, you don't get that massive wave of trapped energy racing toward the center. It completely neutralizes the carryover math. It's honestly like a culinary hack, a brilliant way to use modern tools to outsmart traditional thermodynamics and take all the high-stress timing right out of the process. However, we do have to look at the broader picture here. Impartially speaking, it's really important to note that the target doneness we just discussed, that perfect 130 to 135 degree sweet spot, is heavily biased toward culinary aesthetics and traditional chef standards. If we look at official United States government health standards, the USDA explicitly mandates a 145-degree minimum internal temperature for whole cuts of beef to eliminate pathogenic risks. So a steak cooked to what chefs consider a true medium rare is technically non-compliant with official U.S. government safety standards. It's kind of a fascinating clash, really, between culinary tradition, the pursuit of flavor, and strict public health protocols. So as we wrap up this explainer, I'm going to leave you with a final thought to mull over before you fire up the grill next time. You now understand the physics of mass, the absolutely crucial mathematics of carryover cooking, and the beautiful chemistry of the Maillard reaction. But you also know the official safety guidelines. You have the data, and you know the science. So the next time you have a beautiful ribeye sitting on your kitchen counter, will you follow the government's rules or the laws of thermodynamics? Thanks for exploring the science of cooking with me, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.